March 25th, 1978. This is Carol Mullally.
My mother was born in White River Township the year after her folks came from Germany, and 2 months after her brother drowned in White Lake Channel. The boy is buried in the Mouth Cemetery in White River Township at White Lake. They were good friends. The captain of the lighthouse, Captain Robinson, he had sort of taken the family into his heart, under his wing, and so the boy is buried in his lot. We have went to see it different times. Stone is on it. But the folks then settled in Fruitland Township on McMillan Road. I expect about the next year. That would be in 1881. No, in 1882. My mother was born in 81. My mother worked, as they all did in those days, worked picking berries, cutting wood on the farm, and when she got a teenager, she went to work downtown, keeping house, cleaning, cooking, washing for people that were better off. She evidently was with her sister, married sister, Aunt Minnie, lived in town. She met John Meal. She had, I assume, had other dates as she was growing up. They went to country dances to each other's houses. They would gather a group of young teenagers, and they would roll up the rug in the living room. They didn't have wall-to-wall carpeting them days, I don't think. And they would dance, square dances, mostly, I believe. My mother could call. Right hand to your partner, the grand right and left. And she also could play the harmonica, mouth organ, we called it. She told about one instance when they had a party in the group. There was nobody else that could play music, and she was the only one who can call. I don't know how she managed, but I assume they had a good time. But then I think her most serious boyfriend was John Meal, was a brother to Aunt Minnie's husband, Henry Meal. So that makes 2 sisters married 2 brothers. Mine makes us double cousins. We're both big families. My folks lived in town just rented. They lived in Grandma's house, Grandma Meal's house, for some time, but of course that was before I can remember. That was on Ionia. But they also lived on Wood Avenue, and Wood is where they first lived, I should say. That's where my brother John was born. They got married, and my folks got married. I get ahead of myself. My folks got married February 28th, 1902, and then Johnny was born the next November, 1902, on Wood Avenue. But they lived on Orchard. That's where Grace was born. Emerald, Allen, and Merrill Avenue was the last place that they moved. But in these years, there was John and my brother Carl, and he died at the age of 1.5 years of, they say, spinal meningitis. Then Grace and myself and Florence and Leona. But in this time, my dad was, he had been a cook in a lumber camp, a chef in a New York restaurant, they tell us. He had traveled quite a bit, like they did in those days, on the rails, the boxcars. But he was still a young man. They got married. He lived in, he worked in the gray iron foundry. It was just starting. I believe it was the mother plant of the Campbell Wine Cannon, because he always said he worked side by side with Mr. Cannon as they started. But get laid off or on strike. There was, I guess, many months when there wasn't income. And Grandpa Taylor from out in Laketon Township told them about the 40 acres that was available for homesteading. Homesteading was where you would go onto a place and live on it for 5 years and get a certain amount of it under cultivation within 5 years. So their deed, they got their deed, and I remember seeing it, and it was signed by President Woodrow Wilson. But when they moved out in the country, the furniture was set right in the bushes. They pitched a tent, and we lived in the tent. I barely remember it. I remember seeing the old cook stove. That was even before kitchen wood ranges. Cook stove sitting outside, and my mother cooking out on it. They had a big rainstorm one night. My aunt was staying with them for the sole purpose of going out picking the wild blueberries. She was there with, I don't know, some of her children, too, whether they were in another tent or what. And it rained this night. Wind blew. They had to hold the sides of the tent down by setting the tables and the chair legs on the sides, on the bottom of the tent, and laying on them, putting weights, as much weight as they could on them, to keep the tent from blowing over. There were 2 babies. My sister Leona was just a month old when they moved out in the country, and Aunt Lily, my mother's sister, she had a baby, Fritz, and they were in baby buggies. His buggy didn't have a top on it, so where the rain gathered in the side of the tent on top was dripping down on him, but Leona's buggy had a top on it, so she wasn't getting dripped in her face. But they couldn't bother with the babies in the buggies. They were busy until the storm was over. But they were amazed to hear the next morning that the circus tent that was in Muskegon that night had blew over. So they felt real proud of themselves that they had held their tent from going over. Well, my dad had got a little house built that summer that we moved into. I don't even remember moving in, but I can remember riding on my dad's shoulders, straddling his neck, riding from the tent where the tent was pitched to where the house was being built. They found the highest part of the land. It was a good city block or more from the road where he built this house, and it was lean-tos was added on it for a kitchen the next year, but the first year we lived in that little bitty thing. Like I say, I can't remember it, but I can remember riding on my dad's shoulders. There were 6 more children born out there. So that made 12 children that my mother delivered. But 2 of them, one of the earlier ones and then one in the later years, died in infancy. But we all grew up in that little house. We did for about 9 months one year. We moved across the field to a bigger house that was vacant, and the man wanted somebody to live there. So we thought we were in a palace. But then when he had other tenants coming in, then we moved back to our own little house. So Sister Jeanette was born over in Cleland's house, we called it. But we moved back to our house, and we grew up there, close quarters, but there must have been a lot of love in it. Christmas time, a little Christmas tree would have to be set on a dresser in the corner. We always hung up our stockings. We were sure to find a little bit of hard candy, some peanuts, and some mixed nuts. And if there was an orange, that was something special. My mother always baked us a birthday cake. That was all we ever looked for our birthdays. We didn't expect birthday presents. That was unheard of. She kept us clean, always she baked all the bread, of course. All the women out there in the country did. But children couldn't fill up on bread at a cooked, warm meal. You had to eat what was cooked. So there was lots of boiled dinners, soup, bean soup, pea soup. She always tried to have some pudding to finish off the meal, or canned fruit. Cake sometimes, but generally cake was saved for lunches. We went to school. We had to have bread and something she tried to have as a treat for us and taking to school in our lunch. We would have our main meat was a pig that we would get in the spring as a cute little pig running around. And then in the fall it would be butchered, and nearly every part of it was used. Sausage, bacon, salt the meat, pork down, cure the hams. But we really didn't get to eat ham like people do nowadays. It was all used, stretched out in boiled dinners, soups as flavoring, and in that way. My mother kept us all clean. Naturally, the clothes was most all made, sewed herself. We would pick berries. All of us worked. We would pick berries, pick arbutus in the spring, and sell them. The berries we would pick wild, the blueberries, but we would also pick strawberries or raspberries of our own, or go and pick for farmers that had bigger fields and needed pickers. And they didn't have to watch us. We went to work. No such a thing as throwing berries. We picked to see how many we could pick, how many nickels and dimes we could earn, not to spending money, but to buy shoes and clothes to go to school with and to help with the grocery bill. My mother also worked. If she could go out when the baby would get big enough. She had a baby nearly every 2 years, and the baby would get big enough so that she could leave it with one of us children. I grew up to be pretty much the main babysitter. She would go out and work, pick berries, pick arbutus, always singing. She sang hymns She sang old, I don't know what you would call them, folk songs, ballads. Some of them were sad. She would sing Dead in the Coach Ahead, the mother that was dead in the coach ahead, and the father was on the train taking the casket, and he was caring for a little baby, as the song goes. If I gave it enough thought, some words would come to me. And she sewed for all of us, made over clothes. People would remark they didn't know how Mrs. Meal could keep all those children clothed so clean. They knew that she made use of everything. So we were given things, and she would make them over, and we were proud to wear them. Hand-me-down. Even shoes. I actually had a pair of shoes that was given to my aunt that lived in town, but her children wouldn't wear them because they were both for 1 foot, and they were button shoes. You know, we wore button shoes in those days, and the big thing too then was to get your button shoes and see where the buttons fit, and then to have them wired on. They had a machine that they would fasten the buttons with a wire, like you would say, a big, like a stapler. But it must have been something special. Well, this pair of shoes buttoned up so that they were both for 1 foot, where the shoes were supposed to button on the outside of the ankle up, not just slippers, they were shoes. So I had a pair of shoes that were both, so I was told many a times that I had my shoes on the wrong feet. We would walk, like I said, my mother baked, canned, made jellies, but with a big family like that, and a long ways from the store, and a lot of times not the money to buy with, we wouldn't have exactly the right things to put in our lunch, sometimes not something to put on our bread, and we would take our bread in we used anything from a Caro syrup pail, tobacco. Summertime tobacco came in a nice pail that made a nice lunch pail or lard pail. We went through Grandma's yard. She lived a mile away, and we went through her yard, Grandma and Grandpa Taylor, on our way to school, and we would go there and stop and see if she had something to put on our bread. She generally did. She had some jelly or jam, or maybe just Caro syrup. We'd stop there on our way home. Sometimes there would be an extra special treat that Grandpa happened to be going down our path through the woods. It wasn't just a path, it was a trail that was drive a horse and wagon or sleighs in the wintertime, that he would be going out to the woods to get some wood. He sold wood. And we would get a ride. We missed something, though, with our grandparents. We enjoyed them, and we had a great heritage growing up so close, which was a mile, but they were the closest neighbors to us. We had poor communication because they spoke German. All their conversation with my mother was in German. Grandpa could converse better. We could understand him better, and he could understand us. But we had difficulties with Grandma, but we got by. I have remembered over the years some of the little sayings, but I don't remember them right. Anybody that understands German knows that I'm not getting them right. Like if something was all gone, my mother would say, or so she'd say, "Der ist die ganz ausgespielt, ist er nicht?" Or our slippers. We didn't know of such a thing as house slippers, but slippers that were shoes that we would step into at home, because we wore, a lot of times in the winter time, we would wear what we called lumberman's boots to school, or out in the woods when we went out and cut wood with my dad, or piled the wood. And the shoes that we would step into at home then, we would call, or commission. We also would get them handed down to us. I think that was a German name for house slipper. I don't know. I never had it translated for me. I say we went out and piled wood. You know, there were neighbors, again, a mile away in a different area, that would have a crew of men come, and they would buzz up a great big pile of wood, and it would be just thrown in piles. Well, then it would have to be split and piled and measured into cords so that it would dry out. So my dad would maybe get the job, and we would get so much, I don't know how much it was, we would get for piling this wood, and we'd pile it so it would stand up, and then we'd have to cross pile it at the end, so we didn't always have a tree to pile it against. We'd make our own end of the cord by cross piling the wood. We didn't think anything of going in the morning and taking our lunch along and building a little fire to sit around when we ate our lunch and work until it was time to go home. We didn't have school in the winter time when I was real young, because our district didn't have the valuation enough to pay to have school only 7 months of the year, so there wouldn't be any school from Christmas program until the 1st of March. We had January and February off, but we didn't have all play. We was out working, cutting wood, not only to keep our house warm, but to sell. But then my mother also would do these things. Haul it in on the sled. Sometimes my dad would be working downtown and boarding downtown, and we would be out in the country. She would have to milk the cow, clean out the barn, feed the pigs. Sometimes when she wasn't up to it, then it was up to us older children to do it. I remember my mother at one time, she would tell me to come home. That was my orders, to come home to milk the cow, and my sister Florence, she was to stay and help Grandma do anything that had to be done. This too happened many a times. Of course, Grandma didn't quite understand that I was supposed to go home. Grandma thought that Florence was a much nicer girl than me, because she helped me stay at old Kelly. That's what she called me. She says she runs right on home. But it's all okay. I understood. My mother had a hard life, but she always seemed happy with all her children. She taught us, my dad too, a lot of love for each other, love for God. We went to any Sunday school. There would be a Sunday school startup, and then there wouldn't be enough interest in it, and it would sort of fail. So we attended about 4 different Sunday schools. Wherever there was a Sunday school that we could get to, we were there. But my mother, she She passed away real young in 1929 at the age of 47 years old. But she was not herself the last 4 or 5 years. She wasn't well. We think now that she must have had sugar diabetes. And also, she had myxedema, which is an inactive thyroid, which of course could be corrected now, but back in them days, we didn't know, or doctors didn't know. So the baby was only 3.5 years old when she died. But the older ones, I was of course grown up then. I was married. But then the rest of them, as each one, the older one took over. And my dad stayed single for 17 years, raising these children. Getting way back to when I was young again, in living in this little house, we of course had one main kerosene lamp. My dad would read. There was no such a thing as radio or televisions then. What did people do? We played checkers, dominoes. My dad would read a continued story, read so much each night until it was time to go to bed. And then we would just beg him to read a little bit more. But of course it was always time to go to bed. We slept in one big bedroom. We were all girls. My brother, at that time, he was working for a neighbor and staying there, just a young boy. We all slept in one bedroom. And my mother and dad had another bedroom, which, of course, they shared with whoever was the baby at that time.